Hi there and welcome. My name is Daniel Mintz. I'm Looker's Chief Data Evangelist, and I'm so excited to be joined by Jennifer Redmon. Jennifer, what is your title?
Hi, Daniel. I'm Cisco's Chief Data Evangelist.
Oh my goodness, another Chief Data Evangelist. I had no idea that there was another one besides me. Is there like a club? Do you all hang out and there are a bunch of Chief Data Evangelists that nobody has told me about, or did you think you were the only one?
I'm not aware of a club, but we could start one today.
Awesome. Let's start a Chief Data Evangelist Club. It'll just be the two of us for now, but maybe we can find other folks who want to hang out. Well, I'm so glad to have you here and to get to talk to somebody about evangelism and data and how we get people using data well. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Well, maybe let's start with talking about sort of what the process of getting people to use data looks like. So maybe tell me what has been the most surprising thing in your career as a data evangelist about what actually works to get people using data?
What's been most surprising to me is just the wide variety of preferences that people have for playing with data. So as somebody who's done modeling myself, I love getting deep into the raw data to, manipulating it in different ways and to seeing just what comes out and going in with kind of an exploratory and a scientific mindset. However, there are a lot of other people who don't want that at all. They like a lot of the data science or the ML to happen in the back end and then push an insight directly towards them at the point in their process when they make a decision. So they want to know none of the context, just what the information is they should use. And I think the second biggest surprise I've seen is that in some cases we, and I say we as a society, have kind of pivoted from using tribal or experiential data to structured data or semi-structured data. And what we've done is sometimes we've lost the domain knowledge or the other depth of understanding that comes with that, and we're not enriching our new data sets. And so sometimes we can actually make poorer decisions when we think we're being data-driven.
Yeah, both of those resonate with me enormously. I mean, on the first piece, I fully acknowledge that I'm a weirdo. It sounds like you're a weirdo too. We're like, yeah, data, that's so exciting. Give me the data. I want to play with it. But that is not how most people do not want data. You give them data and they're like, oh, great, thanks. This is not interesting.
Yeah, just give me the insight.
Give me the insight. Yeah, I'm at a decision-making point. I need to make a decision right now. If you have data that can help me make a better decision, awesome, give it to me. But if you're just going to walk me through some charts and graphs, I have other things to do. So no, thank you.
Well, what have you found to be some of the most surprising things in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you said is just absolutely right. Both the piece about really needing to understand what people are looking for and not assuming that they're looking for the same thing that you might be looking for in terms of I want to go deep. Maybe they just want to get an answer because their job is not data. My job is data. For most people, their job is not data. Their job is their job. And they want data to help them do their job better, but that's not about going deep in the data. It's about getting an answer from the data and moving to the next thing. So if that data can come find them when they need it, that's even better than them having to go look for it.
Yep.
And then on the second piece about the domain knowledge, this is something I think about a ton when I'm working with data analysts and data scientists, is just you understand the data, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily understand what the purpose is or the business process or what the person is actually trying to do. And they have an enormous amount of intuitive knowledge about what things should look like, when things are wrong, when things don't make sense, that you're never going to have because you're not the person who works with the data every day, right? And so acknowledging that, leveraging that, figuring out how to bring that knowledge into your analysis is just, that resonates with me enormously. So you mentioned a little bit about sort of how you can motivate people to use data and also sort of what you've found works to reduce the friction that they run into when they try to use data. And that reminds me of that sort of classic product question about, how do we increase motivation and how do we decrease friction? Have you found in your efforts that one or the other is sort of the bigger factor in getting people to successful use of data?
Absolutely. I found that it's about 100% reducing friction and not at all about increasing motivation. In fact, as people, we're generally driven to use data. Many psychologists out there will say that the brain is actually one big prediction machine, and what we're looking to do is just incorporate new data sets. So the way that I've defined evangelism has a combination of enablement as well as education. Because what I found is people, they know what outcome they want to get to. They know what they're trying to do, what decision they're trying to make. What they need help with is getting those various data sets that are going to help them make the highest quality decision.
Got it. So it's really about putting the right tools in people's hands, giving them the right skills, making sure that they actually know how to get from point A where they are to point B where they want to be.
Absolutely. And I think that can be challenging right now as we're in this transition phase, because when I went to undergrad, and I'm guessing probably when you did as well, data science wasn't a major. So a lot of people who have this really deep domain knowledge weren't taught the various skills that are coming out now when it comes to playing and transforming data. So they're upskilling themselves later in their career and kind of helping hone in on what the truth of the matter is. So it's a really interesting time we live in.
Got it. And is that something that you, as the chief data evangelist at Cisco, actually are doing, where you're having people come to you and saying, this is something I wish I knew how to do from school. Can you help me pick up this skill? Where should I look?
It has been. So that's actually how I started in the evangelism role, as I led our education and community success team. So I developed education, data science, ML, AI, data visualization, data engineering, all the facets of education, from the individual contributor level up to the executive level, from the non-technical to the technical. And kind of in my own personal journey in developing what evangelism meant, which point I was given the title of chief data evangelist, was to see, okay, what are the different products, services, and platforms that we need to help people use as much data and as high quality data they can in their role in their day-to-day. So beyond the education, it's been the development of technical platforms. It's been an incredible learning experience to see what it really takes for people in not only Cisco, but in different companies.
So Jennifer, you mentioned, that it's not just at Cisco that you see these things. Are there other places that you're doing data evangelism?
Absolutely. So a couple of years ago, I started working on data science and AI for good, actually with an education nonprofit in India called Akshara, and they do incredible work. Their goal is to educate elementary school kids who otherwise wouldn't receive a primary school education. And up to this point, they've educated about 1 million children who wouldn't receive that level of knowledge otherwise. But for me personally, after starting Cisco's Data Science and AI for Good program as a channel for data scientists, AI researchers, ML engineers, et cetera, to give back, I started focusing on a cause that's very personal, important to me. On August 6, 2015, I lost one of my closest friends to suicide. And as I'm sure many people who are data-driven would have thought, the question was, what were the leading indicators I missed, right? How could I have better used data and analysis and seen that this person was at this high level of risk? How could I have prevented it? So I started a data science and AI for suicide prevention initiative at Cisco, and I am so grateful for the number of people who jumped on board, including Cisco's Chief Data Officer, Shanti Iyer, our Head of Data Science, Sanjeev Patel, and my partner in good, Dr. Annie Ying, who leads Cisco's AI lab out of Vancouver. And what we decided to do was to look at, with the hypothesis that we wanted to use AI or just data science, machine learning to benefit suicide prevention. We started off asking the question, where can we have the most impact? And what we found was that the WHO has established reporting on suicide as one of the 7 priority areas, which we found was interesting because some reporting on suicide isn't something that we'd ever thought about. But when we read through the guidelines, and they're pretty simple. The first one is don't use the term commit. We commit crimes, we commit sins, we don't commit illnesses. But because our nomenclature is to say commit suicide, it stigmatizes mental illness. The second one is to avoid blame. It's so easy to blame ourselves, to blame certain situations, but underneath it all, mental illness isn't even the only cause, which was mind-blowing for me. It's mental illness, it's situational, and we're really still learning what the ultimate cause of suicide is. The third one is to avoid talking about the method. When someone dies by suicide, especially celebrity, we're so used to hearing about what the method of suicide is, but it turns out that by sharing the method of suicide, the number of suicides go up disproportionately in that method. So you get a double bump. Not only do suicides go up, but they go up more in that method. And the last one is neglecting education and resources for help. And especially hard because suicide is stigmatized. So we took that on as our goal and our initiative and partnered with a doctor and researcher and psychologist who's been doing this work since the 90s. His name is Dr. Dan Reidenberg. Over 100 Cisco volunteers offered to manually label data specifically articles, text articles, to against these guidelines. And what we found was that there's only about a 3% adoption rate of the guidelines. And some really interesting and unfortunate research came out last year, the end of 2019, that said that when a celebrity dies by suicide, the way that we report on that suicide by not following these guidelines actually leads to a 13% increase in the national suicide rate. So what we've done is develop a tool. It's reporting on suicide.cisco.com. Right now, it's in a public beta, our minimum viable product phase. And the reason that we're releasing it at this phase is we want input from the media, whether that's the news media, social media, whether that's the entertainment industry, for how we can actually change the way that we talk about mental illness and suicide to destigmatize it and to encourage people to get help.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like incredible work. Thank you for doing that important work. I love sort of, one of the things I love about that story is just the personal connection that you have. It's like too often I see people coming at data with sort of a data first mindset of like, here's the data, what can we do with it? You're coming at it with a very clear motivation of, that's aimed at having impact, right? How do we solve this problem, or how do we make headway against this really, terrible problem? And then you think about what is the data that we can marshal to make an impact. And, I think it's not always the sort of most glamorous work. The fact that so many Cisco folks were willing to volunteer to do that, really critical tagging work, just really brings the whole field forward. So, thank you for doing that great work. And, I think it's just such a wonderful story, both of making an impact on the world, but also of just, really identifying a place where there are data-driven guidelines, there are data-driven ideas that need to be implemented, but it's really about evangelizing them and getting people to adopt them, because we know that if they do, it'll make a real change in the world.
Thank you, Daniel. And what I found in both of these cases, when I started the Data Science and AI for Good program with Akshara in India, and then moving to the suicide prevention space, is that we as data professionals can contribute so much to nonprofits. I mean, think about it, nonprofits have very low budgets, they're run very lean, they have a great cause, but they can't afford data engineers, data scientists, architects. So it's an incredible place for us to volunteer, where we can make a huge difference. And so what I just ask anyone is, if you have a cause that's important to you, don't hesitate to reach out to a local nonprofit, to a national nonprofit, and to try to understand their mission and bring to the table how data can change that, because I promise you there are so many opportunities we're not seeking today.
Yeah, absolutely. We have Data for Good programs at Looker as well, and I've just been amazed at the sort of hunger for it from the nonprofits that we work for, the hunger not just for tools, but for expertise of show us how we can better attack this problem, or what could we do differently. Not only do they not necessarily have the sort of personnel or the resources, but they often, are really concentrated on their mission, understandably. And so they don't have the time to go out and read news releases or look at new products or understand what's possible, right? The world of data and software are changing so quickly that there may be tools out there that are perfectly suited for their needs, but they don't even know they exist. And so the ability to go in as somebody who does this professionally and does have part of, as part of your mandate, understanding what the field looks like and what the art of the possible is, going in and saying like, hey, I see you're trying to solve this problem. Have you thought about using these tools or this technique? Can just be a real game changer.
Absolutely. And as you said, these nonprofits are frequently just overwhelmed with the demands on their time, because their mission is so important. So they don't have time to go and read about the latest in data science or other domains. They're experts in their domain. So we can make a big difference by jumping in and adding additional hands where they're needed most.
So, I'm curious if you've seen organizations who sort of decide that they want to be data-driven, and when you talk to them, you realize that they kind of misunderstand how to do that, or what they should even be aiming for. I'm curious, like, are there misunderstandings that you run across often about data-drivenness?
I think one of the common misconceptions is that becoming data driven is an end state, whereas data driven is really a journey. I mean, you think about as humans, we've always been data driven in some way. We use the best information available to us to make decisions. And early on, that was tribal knowledge. Now we're moving towards these vast data sets. And in doing so, we're not, I think the misconception is that we're moving from one paradigm to the next versus this being a journey. And this journey is going to continue. So I think the misunderstanding some people have is that you become data driven, you check the box and you're done, when that's really not the case. It's an ongoing journey. I think it's interesting to compare it to, for example, the third to fourth industrial revolution, how we got to certain mechanical and analog successes and we were able to check the box. Whereas when it comes to digital successes, we're never going to have an endpoint. And there's also some really important areas that need to be nailed down first. So for example, if you look at regions in Africa, they never had phone landlines. They jumped straight to cellular landlines and cellular towers. But when it comes to data science and this digital journey, there's certain foundational elements that we can't just jump over. For example, high quality data collection, which is preferably automated data collection, is a foundation. You can't jump to an advanced AI or ML algorithm unless you know that your data is clean. Otherwise, you're going to be creating some really strange or unrealistic insights.
You can jump directly there. You just shouldn't. It's a really bad idea.
Yes, you can. You can jump there, and you can end up with a terrible HBS case study.
Yeah, exactly. How AI led people astray. Yeah.
Yes. I think the last misconception is that the highest quality data that we have will help us get to a more deterministic forecast versus probabilistic. I mean, just think about the year we're in, 2020. No one in 2019 could have predicted, 50% of what happened this year, maybe even 30%. So I think it's really important as we take this journey that we keep in mind that there's still only going to be so much that we can account for, and we still need to look at the world in a probabilistic way. And that's never going to end.
Yeah, no, I think humans, by their very nature, we like certainty. We want things to be, okay, now we know what to do. But sometimes actually what the data does is tells you we're not sure, right? What we need actually is caution because there are outcomes that we can't really predict or that we, wouldn't expect. And so, getting comfortable with that uncertainty and understanding how to use it to make better decisions, I think is absolutely one of the things that sort of true data drivenness can lead us to. But I think that whole idea of it not being a destination as much as a journey is really, that absolutely resonates with me. And I think the idea that, it's not a sort of full paradigm shift. It's not like out with the old, in with the new. No, we now have an additional set of tools in our toolbox that we can use and that we can bring along with the tools that we already have, and together that can help us make better decisions. It's not, oh, I don't need these things anymore because now I have data. Like that is
right.
Never the answer, right? It's an additive process where you're refining, you're getting better, you're getting a fuller view of what's happening, because the data affords you that, not the data replaces all the stuff that came before.
Absolutely. I think additive is a great word for the digital journey that a lot of us are on right now.
So as data evangelists, we're out there every day encouraging people to be more data driven. I hesitate to ask, are you using data to measure the impact that you're having as an evangelist and to measure whether your coworkers, your colleagues are becoming more data driven?
I really appreciate you asking that question because actually the first time I met a data evangelist and I asked what their role was, I thought it was interesting until I asked which models they use and they said none. And I thought, oh gosh, that sounds like an awful job. And then, here I am as a chief data evangelist. So it's a little bit of karma. But yes, I strongly believe in using data-driven methods in data evangelism. And I'll actually share with you a model I put together for measuring data-drivenness at the individual level. So you can see here, it's a quadrant. So at the bottom, we have data IQ. And what I've defined that as your data skills divided by the skills you need to succeed at your role or your task or your job. And on the side is data enablement. And so that is basically the tools, the platforms, the culture, all those extra things you need on top of your knowledge to help make you successful. And so in the lower quadrant here, we have data illiterate. So those are folks who have a low data IQ and they have low data enablement. And I don't think I talked to many of those people. Up here, with the high data enablement and low data IQ, those are what I call the enthusiasts. These are people who may not understand how the technology works, but they're really excited about the future, and they're great change agents. Over here, with the high data IQ and the low data enablement, those are your siloed high performers. Those are people who can do a lot more than the tools, the platforms, the culture allows them to do. And as a data evangelist, this is where I believe that you have an opportunity to spend a lot of your time listening to these people and understanding what is the art of the possible? What could we achieve if we gave you X, Y, or Z, and you tell me? So I feel like data evangelism is frequently associated with a lot of talking, whereas I feel like I do a lot more listening. And then up here in the right-hand quadrant, that's where you have data-driven. But as we talked about earlier, the point of data-drivenness actually moves over time, right? So you could be data-driven today, and then a year from now, depending on how the market changes, you could move into one of the other three quadrants. And so what I found is that this is really helpful for organizations and groups who are looking to upskill and make their teams more data-driven, because there's two ways to approach this. The first one is to find a certain job. Let's say a business analyst, and you say, okay, this business analyst needs these different skills and these different tools to be successful. That's what data-driven is, and you upskill everybody. But then there are jobs that historically have not used a lot of data except for our own intuition and experiences and domain knowledge, that it's really hard to figure out what does it mean to be data-driven. So for those, there are two ways to do it. You can either go the first route where you list out the different skills, or a much easier second route is to find somebody who's successful in that role using data, find out what they're doing, teach the rest of the team, and then keep moving in that way. To give an example, I was an account manager with Cisco and used data heavily in my role as opposed to my counterparts. And I would say if you were going to take that type of role and look at how do we make them more data-driven, I would be the person to pluck out. Whereas if you were looking to make the role more relationship-driven, you maybe pluck out somebody else. But finding a high performer who's doing so with data is a great way to help move the entire team. And then when you look at organizations, there are a number of maturity models out there that you can use. And I pulled from almost all of them. But for me, it's really about getting a holistic approach. But I think the underpinnings to all of them, it's really important to have the right culture. So instead of move quickly or move fast and break things, it's move purposely and fix things. One of the most important parts of a mature organization is they've taken into account the ethics, they've taken into account what could possibly go wrong. They've had an informed conversation about, are we going to use neural networks, black box models? If so, where? Or no, are we going to keep everything transparent? So when you look at kind of the models I use, and I'm sure you've used models as well, it really is depending on whether it's an individual, whether it's an organization, what that organization hopes to achieve, and where they are in their various journeys. What about you, Daniel? What models do you use?
Yeah, I mean, I have the fortune or misfortune, depending on how you read it, to be an evangelist of a company that actually sells data tools. And so, that because basically everybody at Looker is excited about data tools because we make a data tool, it's sort of a unique place. And, I think, frankly, a lot of what you talk about really does resonate with what I've seen in my experience at Looker, in terms of, seeing that motivation, people want to get at it, but there's still friction. Even though we use Looker internally a ton, as you would expect, there's still friction. And figuring out, listening to people and trying to understand what are they trying to do, and where are they accomplishing what their goals are, and where are they having trouble and giving up because there's too much friction. Identifying those using data, about which dashboards are you, there's something that I talk about a lot is like, if you give somebody a dashboard or a report or a workbook or something, and their response is, oh, thank you, this is great, that means you've failed. That is their way of saying, I am never going to use this. I don't even know where I would begin using this, but thank you for your efforts, right? And so watching the data, sort of certify that, right? Watching that I give somebody a dashboard, or, we put out a new dashboard, and then going and looking at the usage metrics and seeing that nobody is using it, right? Just confirms that intuition that, oh yeah, they said great, thanks very much, but they meant I don't know how to use this. Versus putting something in front of somebody and their response is, oh, well, where did you get that number? Or can I slice that differently? Because it would be more useful to slice by region than country. Or, these tiles seem great, but I'd love to change this one out. Or is there any way that I could get this delivered into Slack every Monday morning so I don't even have to load it up? Those kinds of great, you've given me something, now I want more. That's the indicator that they're really excited and they are actually going to use the thing that you've put in their hands.
Yeah, and I'd say there's actually two other tools I keep in my tool belt. And one of them is from traditional computer science, and that's A/B testing. So if you want to see if a given model, if a given approach is working, go ahead and A/B test your users. So whether they're internal employees, whether they're your customers, you can go ahead and give this new data-driven approach to them to, maybe 50% of the population. Don't give it to the other 50%, but give them a placebo, make sure they think they're doing it, and see if you're actually making a difference. And then I think another one that's really important to have is really clear KPIs and benchmarks, right? What are you trying to achieve, and how do you know that you're actually achieving it? So going back to the suicide prevention work, we benchmark that only 3%, or going back to the suicide prevention work, we benchmark that this reporting on suicide guidelines only have a 3% adoption rate. We could be measuring a ton of things. We could be measuring visits to our website. We could be measuring API calls. But what we're really going to measure is that percentage, because that's the only thing that matters at the end of the day. Whether people are going to our website or not doesn't matter. What does matter is if those guidelines are being followed and the adoption rate is going up over time. So really keeping a clear and concise view as to your outcome and the adoption and the different processes and inputs to that is really important in making sure that you're actually making a difference, not that you're just doing a ton of work and you think you're making a difference.
Yeah, there's simply no substitute for having clarity around what your goal is and then good metrics to tell you whether you're getting closer or not.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. This was an amazing conversation. I'm so glad to discover that there are other chief data evangelists out there and that they are doing amazing work both in their companies and in the world to make it a better place. So thank you so much for joining me. And I hope to keep up the conversation, and I'll see you at the Chief Data Evangelist Club.
Likewise, Daniel. It was a pleasure speaking with you, and look forward to seeing you in person.
Sounds good.